And now I'll use a chair because that's what they're there for.
Division of labor.
Yes. I sit and the chair holds me levitated in place against the pain of the
Force
universe.
of gravity.
The force of gravity means the same thing as the pain of the universe.
I'm alright with that.
It's
As
all,
a physicist, I'm alright with that.
It's all entropy.
Gravity's not.
Well, why not? Aren't you physicists supposed to be working on that?
Working on what?
Ensuring that gravity is entropy forever.
I don't think that's... No,
we're not working on that. That is the one goal of physics.
To turn gravity into entropy somehow.
I mean, it's not doing anything else but just kind of sitting there.
It's pulling, constantly pulling.
Yeah, I know. It's like a child.
Most of physics studying into gravity is determining how it pulls on very small scales and whether it ever pushes.
And if we can convert that energy into pure entropy, I mean,
then we'd be wasting the heat death of the universe.
Exactly. It's all got to end sometime. Why not yesterday?
Well, because we might have like 30 billion good years left.
Yeah, but I mean, you and I won't
until
be
the
around,
natural
so.
expansion of the well, we don't know that.
No, we know that.
by the time we're both old enough to die, it may be possible to transfer our consciousness into a robotic body.
It may, but there's, I don't know. I want to make some joke about entropy as it relates to that now, but I think we've dragged this out long enough.
That's fair. That's fair.
So why don't we talk about mental entropy?
Mental entropy. Mentropy?
Menstropy.
Ew.
No. See, this is more how our conversations used to start. So I think we've done well here. So why not?
It's a good start.
Yeah, it's a good start, and another good start is any time that you type in Mises.org and hit that beautiful, beautiful enter key.
Or the return key, depending on what your keyboard is set up as.
But if it doesn't say enter, you're kind of a retard. So anyway, I mean, I'm trying to think of a keyboard that actually still says return.
It's a regional question. I think that some of the ones like from the UK will still say return.
Are they still rocking QWERTY over there, or did they switch to Dvorak or whatever?
They're still doing QWERTY, but the extra keys like the backslash and like the brackets and stuff are sometimes in slightly different places, and they don't extend their shift keys like we do.
Oh, well, remind me never to hire a typist from Britain.
I know, right?
Please depress your carriage button.
Typing United Kingdom English as opposed to American English results in a 50% faster die out of your U key than otherwise would be expected.
I've never had a U key die out on me.
Well, that's because you're typing in American English.
I don't think I've had any key die out on me.
You've never had a keyboard die out on you?
A keyboard itself, yes. A key, no.
Huh. Okay, that's fair. I've seen it happen before. Not necessarily with a U key, but with other keys.
You want to know what's insane? I will tell you what's crazy is going from typing on a Commodore 64 computer to a, well, then modern computer, but, pretty much the same thing as today. So, yes. And it's all because the quotation is a shift 2, rather than, just sort of reaching over with the shift and...
Oh, yeah.
Pinky dabbing it.
Well, I mean, that's just one of those things where keyboards were gradually...
They
gradually
reached
reached some kind of... Yeah, they did.
That one had me messed up for a while in my business classes in high school. Well, I mean, business, quote-unquote, business shift 2, unshift 2.
Right.
The business classes in our high school were basically just, you're going to learn how to type. And then everyone's just going to dick around for the rest of the semester. So, there you go.
I'm all right with that.
I am too, because the idea of some of our teachers from high school trying to teach us business just horrifies me no end. There is no entropy to that horror.
No entropy?
No end to the ropey of that horror.
No end to the ropey of that horror.
No E to the end to the tropey of the horror.
No, it's E to the end of the trope to the Y.
My hip hop career did not last as long as yours, clearly.
That's fair.
I mean, you had all those clear hip hop influences, like your physics lab, which I mean, that's about as hood as it gets in the STEM fields.
To be fair, a square wave is a perfect beat.
It is. See, it's not like I don't know what I'm talking about here. I would say that it would be the engineers, but you know that those guys all fell into the whole electronica and dubstep groove.
Well, maybe. They were more into sawtooths. I was always a square wave man.
What are we talking about? All good things.
All good things come to an entropy.
So tell me about this article that you sent me that I can look at by myself, but I'm going to tell you to tell me about it to change the subject.
Oh, okay. So apparently, in early January 2020, Tyler Cowen over at marginalrevolution.com wrote an article about his opinions or thoughts on what libertarianism has become and will become, and he defines this new term called state capacity libertarianism. I'm not sure if he coins the term or if he got it from somewhere, but he's basically making the argument that libertarians need to stop worrying about the state and need to start worrying about things that the state can do to help things. And, I mean, the people at Mises.org in general read this article and were a combination of confused and befuddled and perplexed. And I know those all mean basically the same thing, but, like, the idea of someone talking about libertarianism and saying, well, we just need to make the state as big as it can be without being too bad is probably pretty antithetical to anyone at Mises.
All right, so what you're saying is, because I haven't read the article, so it kind of sounds like he wasn't just saying something along the lines of, well, what can we actually have the state do that will lessen the burden of the state to doing things? You're saying that what he is proposing is actually having a large state and trying to get it to do the right things.
Basically,
which is
something
what we
like
already
that.
do, but we see how that works out.
I think that it might be best for us to start with Joseph Salerno's article. The state is a predator; it can't be used to achieve libertarian ends.
Okay. So let's look at that.
Because this one. So the problem with the other two articles, we've got The Pretense of Intuition by Peter G. Klein. The problem with that one is that it relies on Joe's article to begin with. And the problem with Jeff Deist's article, as far as it goes, is that it's just basically a kind of a little bit of a blog post about his initial responses in no particular order, which would make it a little bit hard to connect it to different parts of the original article. But with Joe Salerno's article, we can go through and look at the points he makes and kind of compare it to the Cohen article itself.
Okay. So we've got the January 30th, 2020 Joseph T. Salerno article on Mises.org. The state is a predator. It can't be used to achieve libertarian ends. So why don't you tackle that first paragraph or possibly sentence, depending on when we decide to interrupt, and...
Let's go.
Yeah.
Tyler Cowen, who is said to be known as one of the libertarian world's deepest thinkers, recently wrote a blog post entitled What Libertarianism Has Become and Will Become, State Capacity Libertarianism. There, Cohen asserts that libertarianism is now pretty much hollowed out because it has not been able to address an idiosyncratic list of problems ranging from climate change to improving K-12 education.
Well, I mean, right there, that's not true. We've addressed those problems. It's just that, what power does any real, libertarian think tank or anyone have to do anything about it within the state capacity? Now, the whole point is that you get these things done outside of state capacity. But if you have the state capacity in control and you have no influence over it, then I mean, just from a broad perspective, that doesn't make make a lot of sense. But well, it sounds like you've got something you want to say. Go ahead.
Well, no, not really. I'm just thinking that like it. If you don't think that libertarianism has been able to address climate change and education, then you haven't been listening.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't even know who Tyler Cowen is. I know I've heard the name before. I don't think I've...
Well, Marginal Revolution is a very well-known website among kind of the, I would say the minarchist libertarian area. He's got it's him, Tyler Cowen, and Alex Tabarrok, and they're both pretty well known. They have a YouTube channel called Marginal Revolution University, which is pretty good for basic economic stuff. But Tyler Cowen is always kind of a little bit of a squish as far as principled libertarianism goes. He's very utilitarian, I guess, is maybe what I'd say, in the sense that he's mostly trying to see if he can pull libertarian bits out of what is currently happening to make things better, which is not a bad position in any significant way. But then he occasionally kind of does things like this, where he drops all pretense of principle and just talks about, oh, well, we need to accept the state and learn to love it. Or, I mean, I'm sure he doesn't actually say that, but you know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, and even if that's how he was thinking, there's no point in going around saying it. But the fact of the matter is, it's like, I don't see where anyone could be in, real libertarian philosophical circles and think that no one has tried addressing these things. And there's, I mean, it's not like we have a lack of material on the subject, especially education.
Especially education.
So, consequently, according to Cowen, smart classical liberals and libertarians have evolved into a view as if guided by an invisible hand. This view Cowen dubs state capacity libertarianism. This name appears in bold font in the original post, seemingly belying Cowen's claim that it is intended as an entirely non-sticky name. According to Cowen, those libertarians inexplicably passed over by the invisible hand of ideological enlightenment have drifted off into Ron Paulism and less savory alt-right directions. Okay, so he's equating... is this an equation of Ron Paul to the alt-right?
No, he's not equating them, but he's
kind of grouping them together here, which is...
Well, he's grouping them together as the people who haven't gotten on board with state capacity libertarianism as he defines it. So it's at least he does separate them and say that they're not the same thing. I mean but he is missing. I mean, Ron Paul is not an anarchist, right?
Right.
So he's not an anarcho-capitalist. Ron Paul is a pretty standard, I'd say, paleo-conservative, paleo-conservative minarchist is how I'd characterize Ron Paul's general, thought processes, which meshes really well with the anarcho-capitalists, especially right now, because the ANCAPs will be like, yeah, we need to reduce the state, and Ron Paul will be like, yeah, we need to reduce the state, and we need to get rid of the worst things that the state does, like the war on drugs and military empire work overseas and things like that. So, I guess continuing with the article, Cowen's doctrine of state capacity libertarianism comprises 11 tenets encapsulated in a total of 719 words, and, absent further elaboration, is surpassingly silly. The tenets are a hodgepodge of mundane facts, casual observations lacking supporting facts, and explicit or implicit value judgments postulated without argument. What state capacity libertarianism seems to boil down to in practice is the old-fashioned mixed economy, as described by Paul Samuelson in a 1950s edition of his famous economics principles textbook. This is mixed with a heavy dose of 19th century gunboat diplomacy to maintain the post-war Pax Americana, extend capitalism and markets, and keep China at bay abroad. Given Cowen's prodigious intellectual reputation, this piece to me seems muddled and insubstantial and hardly warrants further discussion. Jeff Deist is also provided a clear and concise refutation of Cowen's main points. So, I mean, at this point, we can finish, but you see what's happening here is that what the counter argument by the Mises people is that he wrote these things down, but they don't make a whole lot of sense when you put them together. So maybe it makes sense for us to actually look at the original article and kind of
I was
talk about
thinking
it.
while you were reading that we should pop that open after we do this article and look at the points at least, read through those.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I guess the question is, do we want to continue with this with the Salerno article here because we're basically just going to be? I mean, it's good to draw attention to the Salerno article, but for us to just read it out loud and record it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, I think.
Yeah, let's jump to the article on this is on marginalrevolution.com.
Yes.
By Tyler Cowen, January 1st, 2020. Titled, What Libertarianism Has Become and Will Become, State Capacity Libertarianism.
Now, the first paragraph is pretty much just basically what Joe Salerno was talking about. But there are a couple points in here that are not mentioned by Joe so far. For example, unlike the mass culture of the 1970s, it does not tend to breed capital L libertarianism. I guess by that he means party libertarianism. And on top of all that, the outmigration from narrowly libertarian views has been severe, most of all from educated women.
Okay. Well, do we want to read any of those opening paragraphs, or should we jump to the points?
Well, so the next paragraph says, there is also the word classical liberal, but what is classical supposed to mean that is not question-begging? I mean, it's just a term. It can be defined. That's just muddle-headed thinking.
Yeah. We can say what it means. It means.
I mean, a definition is by definition tautological.
Yeah.
The classical liberalism of its time focused on 19th century problems, appropriate for the 19th century, of course, but from World War II onwards has been a very different ballgame. I disagree with that.
I completely disagree with that. The ballgame itself didn't change. The action that was taken may have been a different route.
Well, I would say that the ballgame changed, but not because classical liberalism became incorrect. It's because the other team changed, so to speak. Right? Like, let me put it this way. Economics in One Lesson was written after World War II. And Economics in One Lesson is an extremely, crystalline distillation of classical liberalism applied to mid-20th century problems. The problem is that things like the New Deal and the Great Society came up and they washed over classical liberalism in a pretty overwhelming way. And it's a fight that we lost and haven't been able to claw back since.
Yeah, and it's not exactly like the ideas of what should be done have changed. It's just gotten increasingly harder to change them.
Well, it's not just that too. And I mean, we didn't lose. The classical liberals didn't lose the argument from the intellectual perspective. I mean, all that the New Deal and the Great Society are watered down socialism, and we know from classical liberal thinkers like Mises himself that socialism doesn't work, and that a mixed system will inevitably either go towards full socialism or capitalism. At least that's what Mises said. And so these fights were won, but only by force and not by intellectual victory, I guess is my point. It's like the people who say that the Civil War decided whether states can or cannot secede, and it's like, well, in a sense, yes, but in the intellectual sense, no, not at all, because a rifle pointed at someone's head is not an argument.
Yeah, it's really not. I mean, there's still no reason to say that you couldn't have a state secede. It's just that the precedent that was set was, if you do, we will go to war with you.
Exactly.
So let's see.
So continuing, along the way, I believe that the smart classical liberals and libertarians have evolved into a view that I dub with the entirely non-sticky name of state. Okay, so he's going to start defining it starting with these propositions numbered 1 through
whatever. Let's
11.
So let's dig into the meat of these propositions. Number
Let's
one,
do it.
markets and capitalism are very powerful. Give them their due. Okay, is that a proposition or is that just
It's a statement, but it's so power. The problem is that it's too vague.
Yeah, it opens with
the
nothing.
word powerful in this sense plays to the Marxist expectations, maybe, or the Marxist theory in a way that it shouldn't. Markets and capitalism aren't powerful. They're
functions.
They're functional. They're convenient. They're useful. To call them powerful falls immediately into the hands of any 2-bit leftist.
So number two,
you know what I mean? It's like, oh, look at all this power that the markets gave, Bill Gates, etc.
Yeah, there was it was just standing there for him to take, and he clutched it and became evil. And I mean, he may have just been evil already. I don't know. I think that's more how it works, but whatever. Number two, earlier in history, a strong state was necessary to back the formation of capitalism and also to protect individual rights. Do read Koyama and Johnson on state capacity. Okay, so
that's a paper that link leads to a paper in the journal Explorations in Economic History from 2016.
Okay, so Koyama and Johnson. We might
Yes.
be able to look at that one in the future, but let's just
Sure.
keep going with him. So he started that by saying
Well, let
that
me. Actually, I do want to hold back on that for a second, because he says a strong state, but to be perfectly clear, there has been no state as strong as the United States federal government for the last let's say 30 years, marking the end of the USSR, and from 1950 to 1990, there were 2 of them that were strong states, and they've only been getting stronger. And like in the same sense, like the states that were really strong, let's say in the 1940s, that would be Germany, Italy, and the Soviet Union, did not have capitalism formation or protection of individual rights. In fact, a strong state is usually extremely deleterious toward the formation of capitalism or the protection of individual rights, by definition.
And furthermore, we can go on to state that if we just take the sentence as it stands, that a strong state was necessary to back the formation of capitalism and to protect individual rights, well, has there been more or less erosion of capitalism and individual rights since the growth of the power of the state in America?
Yeah.
The question kind of answers itself. If you're alive.
Yeah, pretty much.
Strong states remain necessary to maintain and extend capitalism and markets. Well, why?
Well, so this is
where the intellectuals debate.
We need to read the next sentence, because it says, this includes keeping China at bay abroad and keeping elections free from foreign interference, as well as developing effective laws and regulations for intangible capital, intellectual property, and the new world of the internet. So China at bay abroad means military. It means tariffs. Keeping elections free from foreign interference means intelligence agencies, like the CIA and FBI. Developing effective laws and regulations for intangible capital means regulating things that don't actually exist.
Courts and laws.
Intellectual property doesn't actually exist, and therefore developing effective laws and regulations for IP is not a libertarian goal. And the new world of the internet,
which, by the way,
he's just saying we need to regulate these new things, which is not a libertarian answer.
Yeah, and not only that, but just as a side note,
and then the next sentence in parentheses is, if you've read my other works, you will know that this is not a call for massive regulation of big tech.
Well, that's exactly
what is
it is. I mean,
it sounds like it.
If you're talking about laws and regulations for intangible capital, intellectual property, and the internet.
Yeah.
What else are you regulating besides big tech?
Well, in order to find out, we have
tech,
to buy his we have to buy his book, Big Business: A Love Letter to an American Antihero.
Well, I mean,
it's literally a buy my book link.
So he may have some bias in the intellectual property area, which any anti-capitalist would look at that and say that he is what's the word they always? He's exploiting the reader.
Well, look. I mean, the fact of the matter is that the publishing world right now has grown up in the presence of intellectual property laws, and therefore it's dependent on it. If intellectual property laws had never been enacted, the publishing business would have built itself up a different way. And it would have had to.
You would think that a lot of people that, especially Marxists and so forth, you would think a lot of people like that would be all about getting rid of intellectual property, because then the art wouldn't be tainted by the exchange of money for its creation, and also therefore probably a lot less of it would be created. But putting that aside, I mean, I like to write. I might do it for free, but I certainly wouldn't crank out a 200,000-page novel if I didn't think that I could make some money off of it.
I don't think anyone will crank out a 200,000-page novel.
You never know. I mean, some people just...
Okay, that's fair. That's fair.
But you'll be making money somewhere else, that's for sure.
You'd better be. That novel's going to take a long time to write.
Yeah. But my side note though, on the new world of the internet, the internet is like 30 years old now. It's not as new as everyone keeps claiming. It's not only become very standardized, it's kind of become watered down from the frontier days. It doesn't feel
definitely
new at all to me anymore, and I did not have the internet when I was born.
No, totally.
It's a technological wonder that happened during my lifetime, and now it's just there. I mean, I look at the same 3 websites every day practically, and I don't go anywhere else unless I'm looking for information. It's kind of evolved into what it should have been always. It just look, information everywhere, and that's
and it only did that because of effective laws and regulations.
Yeah, that's the only reason. If it hadn't been for all those laws and regulations, by gum, we wouldn't have, anything on the internet anywhere.
Yeah, anything.
I don't know. I was trying to think of an example. One didn't come to mind, but...
That's all right. Don't worry about it. Number 3. A strong state is distinct from a very large or tyrannical state. A good, strong state should see the maintenance and extension of capitalism as one of its primary duties. In many cases, its number 1 duty.
I want to make a joke about good, strong state, but I'm just going to say I want to make a joke about it because the joke should be obvious.
I mean, it's one of those things where he's using a peculiar definition in order to make it so that he doesn't sound like a statist.
Yeah, I mean...
By strong, I don't mean strong. I mean the good thing that I want thing. Not strong.
But, point to examples of where anyone ever got that good thing that they wanted a state to be when it was a strong state.
Well, there have definitely been people that have gotten what they wanted from a strong state, even a very large or tyrannical state, not using his definition, right? There are definitely winners in those situations, but the point is that there are a lot more losers. But the problem with the way that this is written is that it's fodder for some, half-witted Marxist to look at and say, even Tyler Cowen thinks that strong states remain necessary to maintain and extend capitalism and markets.
Well,
you can't write things this way. If you write things this way, you're doing more damage to the movement than help.
I have an issue with the whole sentence, as I'm sure you do, but saying a good, strong state should see the maintenance and extension of capitalism as one of its primary duties. Well, maintenance is... that's a term that you could definitely have a lot of wiggle room with. And extension, in terms of the state doing something, is not how I picture capitalism functioning.
I don't know what the extension of capitalism means. He hasn't defined it.
Well, I mean, I can imagine that, the extension of capitalism would entail growth of a capitalistic economy.
Is that what it means?
Well, when you apply the state to that, it can mean a totally different thing, because you're talking about now you're talking about tariffs and trade wars and making sure that your country has a good economic balance as opposed to another country, when really those things shouldn't be an issue at all if you're just talking about the extension of capitalism itself as a concept.
He doesn't limit it to the extension of capitalism within the state's borders. That's the thing. Is that this is so vague and muddle-headedly written that this could be this could be looked at and seen to say that good, strong states force their neighbors to trade with them with military might.
Yeah, it could be perceived to be saying anything along that line, or even along the line of not interfering at all. But the fact that you bring up that the state needs to be there to begin with kind of implies that you do mean the state should be doing something.
I mean, if we
see is a very strong term in this sentence.
Yeah, I mean, if we try to give his argument the most benefit of the doubt we can, he could be arguing from a minarchist perspective, in which case what he's saying is that we want a state that has effective and efficient courts, police, and defensive military, and nothing else. But the way that it's written does not make it sound. It doesn't imply that at all, unless you already know what he's trying to say. And I'm making an assumption that that's what he's trying to say because he's supposedly a free market economist.
Well, see, it comes off like this. It comes off like he's saying that he's taking the idea of capitalism and markets and libertarian ideology, and he's basically just saying, forget all the intellectual discourse that has existed in all of these philosophies. What if we just had a state that tried its best to make to make capitalism function and make it good and make markets good and efficient?
But I think that's what Joe Salerno's point is. That's the title of his article. The state is a predator. It can't be used for libertarian means.
Yeah, that's what all of the philosophy
ends,
really says to begin with. So if you have to throw all the philosophy out the window to make that statement. And if you throw all that philosophy out the window, then your statement is just saying, don't do any of that. Do the thing that you're fighting against in the first place.
I mean, it's ignorant of the fact that state action has a morally different position than voluntary action, right? Like if you don't make these distinctions, then people can get confused about what actually is allowed and isn't allowed, right? Like, I don't know. This is just really muddle-headed and
well, it is, because I couldn't read this and think that he actually knew anything about libertarian philosophy, because what happens when a government runs a market, it's some schlub in power that isn't necessarily aware of or knowledgeable about a sector of the industry, making rules for that industry to operate within, as opposed to multiple industries running their own businesses and interacting with each other in ways that are mutually beneficial, so that everybody can grow and do better, whether or not all discrimination aside. Like, no matter what each person in each sector thinks of anyone else or any other business, that is how they have to operate in order to do business with each other and to grow their individual sectors and businesses. That you can't just have one guy sitting there saying, all right, so the computer industry is going to follow this set of rules, but I don't think those rules will work as well for the oil industry. So let's say they'll follow this other set of rules, but we're going to write those rules, and the only time we want to see any input from the people that we're writing those rules about is if they're going to come in here and tell us, oh, this will make it work better for us, in which case they are no longer dealing with the competition or other sectors themselves and solving problems. They're just going to a guy that can mandate that these other sectors and their competition falls into line with what they want. So lobbying, basically.
Yeah.
That's you get a choice of one or the other. You get lobbying, or you get markets that have to compete and deal with each other to expand. There's not really much else besides complete state control of everything, in which case you kind of still have lobbyists, because you'd be appointing people to run different sectors, and they'd be coming back to you and saying, oh, we need this to make this sector work. It changes nothing to say that you have a good, strong state, that should see the maintenance and extension of capitalism. It's completely getting rid of the idea of any principled capitalism and principled ideology behind markets.
Right.
So number 4.
Yes.
Rapid increases in state capacity can be very dangerous, like earlier Japan and Germany, but high levels of state capacity are not inherently tyrannical. Denmark should in fact have a smaller government. question mark. But it is still one of the freer and more secure places in the world, at least for Danish citizens, albeit not for everyone. I don't know what anything in that sentence is really saying.
Well, okay.
Okay,
let's try to parse through
first
it.
Sentence.
He says specifically, rapid increases in state capacity can be very dangerous, and then he references Japan and Germany, as if it had been possible for Germany to slouch into Nazism slower, it might not have been such a bad thing. Right? Like, what? And then he follows it with, but high levels of state capacity are not inherently tyrannical. I note that he hasn't actually defined state capacity, and maybe he's assuming that we're going to read Koyama and Johnson before we continue with his tiny blog post.
Well, he also doesn't really support that half of the sentence. Like, the next sentence, it kind of sounds like he was going to support that, but he doesn't.
Yeah. I mean, so Denmark should in fact have a smaller government, which is just a statement with no evidence to support it.
What does that mean?
And then he says, but it's still free and secure. Okay, so maybe they don't need a smaller government, at least for Danish citizens, but not for everybody. And then not for everybody, it links to a Google search for Denmark enclaves, which is basically I assume, primarily Muslim ghettos, possibly? Yeah, non-Western ethnicities in Denmark, where safety is not guaranteed.
Well, how is that any more safe for the Danish citizens, though, if it's not safe?
Well, I mean, if you don't enter these ghettos, then you're presumably safe. But this is one of those places where you have. He's basically saying Denmark should have a smaller government, but they also shouldn't have. But if they have a smaller government, then more people will be treated like second-class citizens, and that's bad too. So question mark.
Yeah, I can't really figure out what...
This second sentence goes up and then down and then up and then down, and it just doesn't say anything.
Yeah, it kind of reeks of just someone wanting to get in buzzwords in a paragraph, but I don't see any buzzwords necessarily.
No, it's like I said, it's one of those. He just says a thing and then tempers it, and says it a little bit more and then tempers it. It's just like, okay, we've reached the same mean position that we were before this sentence. What did the sentence do? Nothing. It gave us an example of Denmark that there's no opinion on how to parse it.
I'm picturing Tyler Cowen as like a bearded dwarf in a forge, and he has this heated metal and some tongs, and he bangs a hammer against it over an anvil, sticks it in some water and cools it off, and then immediately sticks it in the coals again to heat it up, and then just hammers on it a little bit more. That's what this is reading like. So, number 5. Many of the failures of today's America are failures of excess regulation, which I thought was what he was talking about doing, but I don't...
Well, he says excess, which means more than there should be, but there should be a certain amount.
And that amount is X,
say how
and X is the number that...
X is literally an unknown. It's right when I say it is.
But many others are failures of state capacity. Many of the failures of today's America are failures of state capacity. Our governments cannot address climate change, much less improve K-12 education, fix traffic congestion, or improve the quality of their discretionary spending. All right, so first off, all of those tie in such a horrible, demonstrably stupid way. The government can do lots of things about lots of that because they have tons of money at their disposal. But let's talk about what he's actually saying they should spend money on. K-12 education, traffic congestion, and let's skip...
Well, he doesn't say spend money. He says that it's a failure of state capacity, which just means that they need to do better.
Well, no. If you're talking about fixing traffic congestion, you are talking about doing something taking an action which there's no negative action that's going to cost less in fixing this problem. You have to do something that would ultimately cost money, short of just blowing up the roads and telling everyone to walk, which would definitely fix traffic congestion. But the thing is, saying improving the quality of discretionary spending. Well, what is discretionary? Discretionary spending is such a small part of the total government budget, and they will not budge on the non-discretionary, which is stuff that arguably could easily be budged on. We're talking defense and healthcare spending as a majority, and like if you compared the amount of money in the entire country that is spent on roads versus not even getting into the whole difference between the states and the federal government spending money on roads, but just pretend that it's all from the same place going to the same place for a minute.
Yeah.
You could take a fraction of a percent of what they're spending on healthcare and fix a good portion of the roads in the country right now, but they will not touch the healthcare spending because it's just...
This is a problem that was described by Thomas Sowell when he was talking about how government bureaucracies propagate themselves, right? It was the example of the bureaucracy who has two goals. Goal number one is to give life-saving medicine to children, and goal number two is to build statues of Benedict Arnold. And anytime that they see the possibility of their budget being cut, they're like, oh, well, these children won't be getting their medicine. And they never think about how much they could save by stopping building statues of Benedict Arnold.
Yeah, that's the point
This is the nature of the state.
It's the exact point that I wanted to make, but Thomas Sowell is so much better at it.
It's a really good example.
Yeah.
And it explains so much about how the government reacts to changes in things. Like, if we don't get this budget increase for the schools will fall apart. And it's like, well, no, this budget increase doesn't lower the amount of money that you get for the schools. You still have the same amount of money going forward. You can continue doing the same thing over and over again, and there won't be any change to that. The only reason that there would be a change to that is if you were spending money in places that you didn't need to, and you know what I mean?
It's really simple. It's you have K through 12 education, and you're spending $500 million on it, and then you have defense, and you're spending $1 trillion on it, same year, and you could easily take another $500 million from the defense spending, and do some more K through 12 spending, double the budget. And it wouldn't even put a dent in the amount of defense spending you have. But then you're threatening national security. The whole country will fall apart and spies will be everywhere because that $500 million, that was, we were teetering on the brink right there.
Yeah, even though we spent less than that the year before.
But it's even better because the education is so bad that almost everyone you speak to will not know that there is that striking of a distance between the spending amounts.
Well, to be fair, you're talking about federal spending on K-12 education, which admittedly is a small fraction of actual full spending on K-12 education.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to separate the state and the federal budget, and let's not even get into the federal.
This doesn't even get into the problem that simply throwing money at these problems doesn't necessarily fix them.
No, it doesn't. But it does. It does bring up the problem that you're just. Nobody will do the things that he's talking about doing. The state is not going to apportion money appropriately to fix these problems,
even though it easily could.
Like 3 hours from now they could start, just long enough to get everyone into the halls of Congress and start talking about it. But they won't. They will never do that.
Hey, you know how we were planning on spending $800 billion on the military next year? Yeah, let's make it $795.5 billion.
And then they shoot him.
Monster. And we'll take that extra money and we'll put it towards the schools. Monster. I imagine someone running up and beating him with a cane.
I almost want to see the real circus unfold, like the actual have a horror story unfold
C-SPAN
before our
after
eyes,
dark.
where it's like you're looking at C-SPAN and it's like the halls of Congress and everyone's just I keep calling it the halls of Congress because it makes it sound so ridiculous, but they're up there making their arguments, and it's just like, well, we couldn't do that. We couldn't give more money to the schools. If we doubled the budget for the schools and actually educated people, they'd be able to see what we're doing with the money, and then they'd want more money for the schools, and that's just crazy.
Right. So he continues, much of our physical infrastructure is stagnant or declining in quality. I favor much more immigration. Nonetheless, I think our government needs clear standards for who cannot get in, who will be forced to leave, and a workable court system to back all that up, and today we do not have that either. Those problems require state capacity, albeit to boost markets, in a way that classical libertarianism is poorly suited to deal with. Furthermore, libertarianism is parasitic upon state capacity libertarianism to some degree. For instance, even if you favor education privatization, in the shorter run we still need to make the current system much better. That would make privatization easier if that is your goal.
Well, he keeps saying to boost markets, but in the context that he describes, that makes, like, it's not that it makes zero sense, it's that it makes a horrifying kind of sense, because if you're going to decide who cannot get in, who will be forced to leave, and have a workable court system to back it up, and
well, hold on a minute. Okay, so the 4 examples that he gave us, climate change, education, traffic congestion, and discretionary spending, are all almost entirely non-market phenomena at this point.
Yes, and not to mention that most of it is state government rather than federal government, so now we have to...
Well, no, but I guess my point is that boosting markets can't fix traffic congestion unless one of your things to boost the markets you do is privatize the roads.
Well, yes.
You see what I'm saying? like he's saying this requires more state capacity, and by more state capacity, I mean privatize the roads. But I don't think that's what he means.
That's not what he means at all. He was specifically talking about a good, strong state taking action.
Right, but how do you fix traffic? How do you fix traffic congestion on state-owned roads by boosting markets? You don't. You steal from markets to pay more lazy people to build more roads and build them poorly.
To which some jackoff would tell you that, oh well, no, you just have people in that are in markets donate some of their earnings to fix the roads. It's like, well, what if they don't want to?
Well, then we tax them.
We take it.
Did I tell you the story about the road congestion near my place?
Oh, hold that thought for 1 second. I don't want to forget this real quick. I just want to point out.
Okay,
he says. He talked about people. He basically talked about people crossing borders into and out of countries and the legality and the regulations that would cover that. Then he says those problems require state capacity, albeit to boost markets. So, saying to boost markets, do you mean that you're only going to let people in that are educated and can help to boost the markets? Because I don't think that he would actually...
You could make that argument. But one of the other points he makes in that previous sentence is that he needs a workable court system. And that's not a market problem either.
Yeah, that's kind of where I was going with that.
Unless we privatize the courts, which I'm in favor of, but that doesn't appear to be what he's saying.
Well, that's never what he's saying, because he's specifically saying that a good, strong government should be taking action on these things.
Yeah.
So there's no wiggle room for saying privatizing anything. Even when he says it, it's just wrong in his own context.
Well, if he gave examples of things that boosting markets could improve, like, how about, okay, I have an idea. What about the decline of retail establishments, like malls and stuff like that? If you quote unquote used state capacity to boost markets, it's at least conceivable that could bring some life back to those retail establishments. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
But he specifically chose 4 or 5 examples that deal with non-market stuff, and then he's like, boost markets, but not in markets.
Well, no, you're forgetting the weird spiritual, pseudo-religious, like, K through 12 education equals competent workforce equals growing economy because of education, which, I mean, laugh. You spend 13 years.
Yeah.
You spend 13 years in those schools, and then they tell you go to college to get an education to know how to do something. So,
right.
Because honestly, K through 12 should teach you enough to where you can either do something competently once you leave.
Well, I mean,
or
this is something...
train you well enough to where you can jump into a field in college without having to take the bullcrap courses. Like,
well, yeah, there's some of that. Like in STEM, for instance, like you take some STEM courses in high school, and they get you more prepared for the STEM courses, or you get to skip, with AP tests or whatever. Like, that's a thing. But like, I'm thinking more along the lines of your first point, basically, that why aren't they teaching people how to, like, manage their money or start a business or do their taxes.
Which would be a way that would really, help, with the extension of markets.
So the point I was going to make is that a lot of homeschool courses nowadays will have a teach kids to start their own business section, right?
You don't say.
This is a thing that's useful for you in life that you could learn before you're finished with 12th grade.
I wonder if there's any specific examples we could cite of that.
I mean, I would, but it would sound like an advertisement.
Yeah.
Anybody who's listening to this who knows what we're talking about will know what we're talking about.
They're probably saying it to themselves right now and chuckling.
They probably are hearing it in Tom Woods' voice. Did I tell you the story about the traffic congestion around my place?
No, you didn't do that because I interrupted you. So do that now.
No. I mean, did I tell you about this before, or like an earlier episode? Or something
I don't
like that?
think you did. It doesn't sound familiar.
Okay, they started. There's there's only a few roads that cross the Rio Grande in the area. And the only one up north here is this one road that's called, I think, 550, and they started construction on it, I think, to widen it. And here's the thing. The road became suddenly very congested, and I was confused. Like, there would just be miles and miles of backed up traffic in all directions for no really obvious reason. Because as I would drive along this road and sitting in traffic, I found that the number of lanes that were open, even with the construction going on, was the same as before. What they'd done is they'd gotten rid of an internal, like a lane divider, and turned that into a temporary lane. And so what actually happened is that in order to give the impression that traffic is congested, they turned all the lights from two-way to one-way, so that effectively the road has lost half its capacity for no reason. And I'm not exaggerating or joking. This is what they did. They turned roads that, had the usual green light, two-way, green light, two-way, green light, two-way, green light, two-way, to one way, so that you literally get half as much time to drive in any given direction.
That's just...
It's a farce. It is the most insane example of blatant mismanagement that I've ever seen.
Well, I mean, it could be worse.
Oh yeah, they could have made it so that the road was closed.
But I'm trying to think of a reason that they did that, like some construction reason, like, oh well, they'll be moving stuff here. It's like I can't come up with it. It just doesn't make any sense. It's one of the. It kind of feels like
they have those heavy concrete barriers between the road where the cars are on and the road where the construction is happening. Like it's not even like an issue of like safety. It's like, no, you have like 10-ton concrete barriers. They're not going anywhere. And even if they would, even if someone hit them, the speed limit's like 35. So like, that's not really that big of an issue. It's literally just to make people think, man, this road sure is congested, and then feel happy when they finish the construction. I can't think of any other reason to do it.
It's someone just very bitter about things. So like, yeah, we're gonna make this happen.
It sounds like it. That's what it seems like.
You wonder sometimes if there's just you get you get that person in there that's just like they've had enough, like with life, and so they will make as many other people miserable as possible. Which is how I feel about politicians sometimes, to be honest. Like you got to wonder if you really take into account some of their personalities and how childish some of them are. Is that something that happens? Like, are there actually people in politics that just they do things just out of spite, and then you're like, oh wait, yeah, there are.
Yes, there
Definitely.
are. Definitely.
Where do we leave off? Number 6?
Unless you have something to say about the last sentence or two of number 5.
Okay, when he says, for instance, even if you favor education privatization, in the shorter run we will need to make the current system much better. All right, well, the current system has been degrading on a downtrend since the 70s. and they've been
despite massive increases of funding.
Yeah. Not well. I mean, let's put emphasis on the massive.
I thought that's what massive does.
Yes, it's. There's no word entropy there. Massive is massive.
Yes.
So
I don't see how making
a bunch of money to
on the
try
public
to
system
improve something that so far hasn't been improved by wasting a bunch of money on it would somehow make it easier to privatize it. I can somewhat agree with that. I mean, because once they completely collapse and there's no other option, maybe. But by that time, I'm expecting a lot more things to collapse, and I don't think anyone's going to be thinking about privatizing schools.
Yeah, it's a weird statement.
Because
in the shorter run, we need to make the current system better. We can't because it's a public system. That's the point.
It goes back to what I said before. We're spending so much on so many other things compared to education that by the time education collapses, it's we're circling the drain.
Well, no, I mean even if we doubled the amount that we spend on education tomorrow. It still wouldn't. It might help for like a short period of time, but what would happen is that money being, not having advantage of a price system, would start to be funneled into and also not being handled by people who have any personal skin in the game, would begin to be mishandled more and more until we got back to where we were already. That's the problem with a system like public education, where you have a inverted incentive structure. Where if you give me more money, I'm not actually going to make services better. What I'm going to do is find ways to waste that money, and then ask for more money again.
Yeah, but it's not like there's any real concrete example of that happening that you can point to. College tuition.
I'm sorry, it sounded like your sentence had an extra something at the end there. Oh, okay.
I sneeze very vocally sometimes.
Yes, that's reasonable. And so, yeah, I mean, those last two sentences don't make a lot of sense.
So number 6, I will cite again. Okay, so this is an emphasis number.
Buy my book.
I will cite
Buy
again.
my book.
The philosophical framework of my book, Stubborn Attachment. Well, very fitting. A vision for a society of free, prosperous, and responsible individuals. Everything that he has described so far is the exact opposite of that.
I'm looking at the page, and the description, the first line of the description is, growth is good.
The intelligence of a Don Lemon.
I suspect that Tyler Cowen is way more intelligent than Don Lemon.
I mean,
but he's not helping my case.
I've met several schnauzers that were more intelligent than him, but he's not helping his case at all.
I don't.
He can write full sentences. I'll give him that.
As a means of practicing the altruism that Stubborn Attachments argues for, Tyler Cowen is donating all earnings from this book to a man he met in Ethiopia earlier this year with aspirations to open his own travel business.
That's...
Okay.
He doesn't even understand how venture capitalism works.
Apparently not. Stubborn Attachments at its heart makes the contemporary moral case for economic growth and delivers a great dose of inspiration and optimism about our future possibilities.
That's what we need, a dose of inspiration and optimism. You know what else had a dose of inspiration and optimism? Bernie Sanders' platform.
Ugh.
I mean, if you're an idiot, but... well, that's not fair. I mean, we are a bit more philosophically read than most people, so I don't want to say it's idiots, but I do want to say that I think people don't do their due diligence when it comes to supporting people's platforms.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
And there are also
number 6
idiots.
is just a non sequitur.
In total fairness, there are also idiots. Like
number 7.
Like Bernie Sanders.
Number 7.
That was a sneeze, sorry.
The fundamental growth experience of recent decades has been the rise of capitalism, markets, and high living standards in East Asia, and state capacity libertarianism has no problem or embarrassment in endorsing those developments.
But if what you say is true, then why do we need state capacity libertarianism?
Well, okay, let's...
If that sentence has any merit...
Okay, hold on. Here's the next sentence. It remains the case that such progress, or better, could have been made with more markets and less government.
Okay.
Still, state capacity had to grow in those countries, and indeed it did. Public health improvements are another major success story of our time, and those have relied heavily on state capacity, let's just admit it.
Public health improvements.
I mean, he has something of a point in the sense that...
He does, but... I mean, that's not the first one I would have jumped on when everyone in America is talking about how horrible healthcare is. But, but I mean, he did say public health improvements, so if we're talking things like...
He's talking about East Asia. He's talking about people getting plumbing for the first time. Like, that's a big deal. But it's important to note that in order to actually afford, to develop plumbing systems, you need to have the wealth to do it. And increasing state capacity in the wrong way can easily stifle that.
Yeah, as it probably has for longer than it should have in countries with a massive labor force like China.
Yeah, China. Which is, I mean, public health improvements, I bet China's wishing they had a bunch more public health improvements right now.
Good, you got my joke.
But let's see. It is February 1st. It is 8:14 p.m. Mountain Standard Time.
We are still alive and not dying of coronavirus.
Well, no, but about something like 2 to 4% of 12,000 people in mainland China are.
Should you find this recording in the coming decades? This is our story. Here's what happened.
But
Raccoon City, 1996.
One of those cities in China is probably named something like the word for raccoon in China.
Well, it's kind of funny. Apparently the company that was working on the virus has the umbrella logo, but it's green and gray instead of red and white. And raccoon is only one C away from Corona's. What's the word? Begins with an A.
Like the Latin name?
No, where you mix up a word.
An anagram.
Yeah, it's almost an anagram for Corona. Raccoon is.
That is actually really funny.
I was reading an article. I don't remember where, but we'll talk about that another time. I'll look it up again.
Yeah, that's fine.
So
Let's move on to number 8.
Yeah, the major problem areas of our time have been Africa and South Asia. They are both lacking in markets and also in state capacity. How is Africa lacking in state capacity?
Well, so remember, state capacity means state doing good things.
Oh, okay, yeah. So,
like it's just a word that apparently Koyama and Johnson made up to define what happens when the state does something that actually isn't a horrible, horrible failure.
So if it's a boot tramping on someone's neck for all time, that's a totally different thing.
No, because he also says that rapid increases in state capacity cause things like Japan and Germany in World War II. So actually, no, I'm confused.
So we still don't have a clear definition of state capacity.
Apparently not. I mean, it's
how many state capacity libertarians do you think there are in the world right now?
Well, there aren't any, because state capacity libertarianism is a word that Tyler Cowen made up earlier this month.
So not even him, you don't think?
No. I'm sure he wouldn't call himself a state capacity libertarianism because he doesn't believe that term means anything at this point. I assume.
I hope.
But I mean, he's dodging the question here. The problem areas have been Africa and South Asia precisely because they've had too tyrannical a state, and he's not drawing a clear method for converting bad state capacity to good state capacity.
What are you talking about? The blood diamond market is booming.
Well, it is, but not for like the average person in Africa.
Well, no, we're trying to expand state capacity so that we can expand market capacity.
Well, no, we're trying to convert state capacity from bad state capacity, a la Germany, Japan, to good state capacity, a la Denmark.
So that we can then extend the reach of markets and capitalism.
Somehow.
On the backs of blood diamonds.
On the backs of blood diamonds. on the backs of people who will die early deaths because they're breathing in dust from stones that they are chipping away to get at blood diamonds.
No, that's just the fault of pure capitalism. Let's be clear here.
Oh, that's my mistake. Yeah, okay, that's fair.
That's how that works.
I just don't know what he's saying here. Like, what's he saying? He's being so vague about state capacity because it's not like he's saying that state capacity is a good thing, and he's not saying that's a bad thing. He's saying it's a thing that they need more of because they haven't done good in markets. I don't get it.
Do you remember that episode of Penn and Teller where they were talking to the guy who was like waving his hands around trying to describe the spiritual essence of this thing that was clearly tangible, and they kept like having the footage fade in and out over itself and like the transparency to just make it look like he was giving this mystical presentation. That's just kind of how I'm picturing him talking about state capacity. And then we will have state capacity, and it will sometimes be too slow, but sometimes too fast. But when it's just
when it's too fast, we get the Nazis.
But when it's just right, the three bears will show up, and Goldilocks will eat the porridge, and we'll have the great porridge of the markets. And
the three bears: Stalin, Lenin, and Khrushchev, or is it Stalin, Lenin, and Trotsky?
It's good, da. All right, number 9.
Number 9. State capacity libertarians are more likely to have positive views of infrastructure, science subsidies, nuclear power, requires state support, and space programs than are mainstream libertarians or modern Democrats. Modern Democrats.
No, hold on there. It's just he just throws that phrase out there like everyone's supposed to accept it. Nuclear power only requires state support because the state requires it to require state support.
Yes, that was the point I was going to make. Like that shouldn't be an exclamation point. It should be a question mark.
I very rarely word things that well when we're having these discussions, so I had to take that one.
Sure. No, go ahead. No, that's fine.
I actually don't remember how I said it now.
well, it's all right. We have a recording.
I hope so.
Well, no. The thing about nuclear power requiring state support is that people will like say. About like people who are like Second Amendment absolutists, like, well, you want people to have atomic bombs, and it's like, who would you rather have an atomic bomb, Kim Jong-un or Bill Gates? The system that you are interested in allows an insane dictator like Kim Jong-un to have an atomic bomb, and the system I'm talking about allows a multi-billionaire philanthropist who has produced products that have made millions of people's lives better to have this atomic bomb. In whose hands is that weapon safer?
And you know, there's a couple of other questions to ask, like, you know, who's going to want to waste the money on a nuclear bomb? Well,
there's no legitimate use for one. So, like, yeah. And I mean, the only reason that nuclear power relies on the same fuel cycle as nuclear weaponry is because the state wanted bombs. like it's like if the scientific community had been interested in nuclear power for power's sake and not for its destructive power, we would all have home thorium reactors probably by this point.
Yeah, you know, someone once pointed out to me that the government has nuclear submarines, and yet we have these giant nuclear power plants to power homes, and it's just like, well, wait, why do they have such good technology on such a smaller machine, and the public doesn't have access to anything like that? The obvious answer, of course, being that no, bad, materials too dangerous, government must control them, and therefore...
Well, there is definitely the possibility of danger with nuclear materials, with some of them at least. But like,
it's a good point that you know we don't get the benefits of a lot of the things, a lot of the progress that has come out of this, and there's a lot of other things that, you know, people use all the time that are dangerous. You know, like you know, cutlery. It just.
Well, cutlery and radiation are dangerous and very different, and have different ways to detect the damage that they do.
That may be, but there's also the whole idea of, like, you know, there is a sense of self-preservation, and I don't think that people that are worried about it are necessarily going to want to be handling nuclear materials, so, you know, they don't have to.
Yeah, there's that too.
But I mean, if your choices are having a market system in which a company finds a way to build a safe and clean and very efficient home power reactor.
Yeah. And say that they package the fuel in such a way that it is very difficult to tamper with.
Yeah, I mean, we
like
have
that.
items sitting around in our houses that are dangerous, that were just put together in safe ways by companies that are functioning in a market.
Well, I mean, people used to use those uranium paint plates.
Yeah, and there's dangerous materials in cell phones and cell phone batteries, in a lot of home electronics.
Well, no, but I mean, like, if the technology was based on, like, thorium instead of uranium plutonium, it'd be impossible to actually build a bomb. And the worst that you could do is create a dirty bomb, but people can do that nowadays anyway.
Wow, someone should tell that to the government and maybe suggest that they... Oh, wait.
Uh-huh.
Gotta have... it's like, what is it, corn pops? You know, gotta have my bombs.
Gotta have my bombs.
All right, so what was that? One sentence? Where did we leave off?
Yeah. Modern Democrats often claim to favor those items, and sincerely in my view, but de facto they are very willing to sacrifice them for redistribution, egalitarian and fairness concerns, mood affiliation, and serving traditional Democratic interest groups. For instance, modern Democrats have run New York for some time now, and they've done a terrible job building and fixing things. Nor are Democrats doing much to boost nuclear power as a partial solution to climate change, if anything, the contrary.
I'm having trouble seeing where he jumped from the first sentence to all of that.
Well, so the first sentence ends with modern Democrats, and then the remaining sentences are him talking about how modern Democrats say that they are in favor of these things, but not actually, because they don't actually do them, and they give them up for things that don't make sense, like wealth redistribution, which is dumb.
But okay, so he's saying state capacity libertarians are likely to have a positive view of these things. But, okay, so we don't know anyone who's a state capacity libertarian. But then he, like, groups them in with modern Democrats, and it's like, you're really selling me on this as a libertarian.
Well, but he's also saying that state capacity libertarians are more likely to have positive views of these things than modern Democrats. But state capacity libertarians is a subset of libertarians, and libertarians are a subset of a percent of the voting public. Like, what's the point?
Yeah.
Like, there's nothing here. This is just him saying Democrats should do better. And because they have state capacity, they really should be doing better, and I don't understand why.
Yeah, I mean, he still hasn't told us anything really about state capacity libertarians, except vaguely described what their positive views of things might be.
I mean, my assumption is that he's expecting us to read the Johnson-Koyama paper, but, like, if you're writing a blog post about something where you're using the term and you're bolding it because, oh, this term isn't in common use, then you should assume that people who are not especially I mean, I think it's incorrect to require someone to read a 20-page economics article to understand your blog post when it's not necessary. Like, you can write a very wonkish blog post that requires the knowledge from many economics texts and journal articles, but if you're going to if it's hinging on a definition, you're just wasting my time.
Yeah, because if you're not going to tell me what I'm actually reading about, like if you can't give me the information, it kind of reeks of, I think it was...
20 pages of economic journal is too much for me to get a definition from.
Yeah, and, I think Lewis Black once said something that applies very well here, in transition to speaking of blog posts and, economic philosophizing.
Sure.
He was talking about... corruption in corporations and some certain CEOs of companies that stole a ton of money back in like the 90s, I think.
Sure.
And he said there should be a law about this. You want to know what that law should be? It's very simple. If you have a business and you can't describe in one sentence what it does, it's illegal. And I think that's kind of what is going on here. He can't describe his own idea in multiple sentences. I mean, I would give him a couple paragraphs at least, but
sure.
Explain to me what exactly you're saying, because it sounds like you're just dipping from libertarian and democratic like liberal and libertarian ideas at random and at semi-random with like very vague explanations as to why you're picking these things.
It sounds to me like he's trying to work up an excuse or work up a way for him to start talking like a Democrat and not have people say that he's a Democrat.
Yeah, he's nudging me in the rib and just saying, come on, just accept that we need some social programs. Come on, we just need some of this.
It's not even that he's saying that. It's more like he's saying, okay, I'm going to read to you. I'm going to say, in my opinion, and then read to you the Democratic party platform. But I'm not a Democrat. I think that the good things the things that you like that I say, I really mean, and the Democrats don't. And it's like, okay, dude, whatever. That's not an actual argument, or that doesn't provide me with any new knowledge.
Number 10. State capacity libertarianism has no problem endorsing higher quality government and oh my god, you know what this reads like?
What's it read like?
When those Zeitgeist people kept saying "it," referring to some vague plan.
Oh my god, you're kind of right.
State capacity libertarianism with "it."
It
has no problem endorsing higher quality government and governance. Well, yeah, I mean, if there was a potential for higher quality government and governance, I would have no problem endorsing that either.
I'm in favor of higher quality everything.
Yes, go nuts. But
go nuts.
How is this
going
to happen? Whereas traditional libertarianism is more likely to embrace, or at least be wishy-washy towards small, corrupt regimes due to... No! What libertarian is embracing corrupt regimes? Besides you, supposedly libertarian, libertarian.
What is he even talking about?
Where did this come from?
Traditional libertarianism is more likely to embrace, or at least be wishy-washy towards small, corrupt regimes due to some of the residual liberties they leave behind.
No. They like the liberties. They want the regime to go away.
Well, no. Okay, so...
No, what he's talking about here are things like, we have a Second Amendment in this country, so I can embrace the corrupt regime of America because I'm allowed to own a gun. But that's not what libertarians do at all. And
well, some libertarians might, on some level. Or they might say, I'm trying to think of a country that this applies to. Like, is he talking about Chile under what's-his-face back in the... Oh, what's that guy's name? You know who I'm talking about, right?
I don't know where Che Guevara is from.
No, not Che Guevara.
Chile.
The guy that people blamed Milton Friedman for or something.
No, I don't know who that is.
Pinochet.
Oh, helicopter dude. You could have just said helicopter dude. I would have known who you meant then.
I didn't think of helicopter dude either, actually. No, Pinochet. Is that what he's talking about? But I mean, there's a lot wrong with that on multiple levels, right? Like, the libertarians didn't approve of throwing communists out of helicopters, right? But at the same time, the number of communists that had to be thrown out of helicopters was small compared to the number of people in a comparably sized country that had to be murdered in death camps by Che Guevara. Like if we're being utilitarian here, we may as well go the whole 9 yards, right? I mean, small corrupt regime kills 3,000 people. Understood. That's bad. Also small, but very totalitarian, also corrupt, kills tens of thousands of people. And he's like, well, we shouldn't say that's worse. Yes, we should. If you're going to make a utilitarian argument like that, then yeah, go for it. But you got to go through all the way. Like, he's making utilitarian arguments and then complaining when other people make utilitarian judgments under the same kind of idea.
Well, it's like the idea of embracing both the dog of the non-aggression principle and the dog of corrupt regimes and just like squeezing them to your breast while they snarl at each other is...
Well, I only gave the Pinochet example because that's the only one I can think of where people on the... Like I can't think of any other case where... But like other cases I could think of that might be like that is like where you have to pay the cop a bribe to not get arrested. And it's like, well, is that bribe less than the amount that it would cost me if I were actually arrested? And is that amount, significantly damaging my lifestyle? If it's not, then viva corruption, right?
It's like, what an argument. As long as I can afford the corruption, I guess I'm cool with it.
I mean, he's saying that my residual liberties are left behind. So it's like, okay, I have liberty, but twice a year I get pulled over and I have to hand a $50 bill to the cop.
If he hadn't also said wishy-washy, I could have just accepted that embrace was just the wrong word that he uses.
Right.
Nobody is really saying, oh, well, because...
No, he's talking about a non-existent phenomenon. I don't know what he's talking about.
It's just...
And he has links everywhere else, so it's like, what the hell are you talking about?
It's like, this country will shoot you in the head and kill you, but this one will just come to your house and beat you senseless every day. And so it's like, oh, well, I embrace that regime. No, I accept that that's my choice. I'm not embracing it. I could have accepted that, he didn't mean embrace if he hadn't also said wishy-washy, but then it's like, yeah, I'm totally embracing the ones that come to my house and beat me. I don't want to be wishy-washy about it or anything.
Yeah.
It's obviously a much better thing. It's clearly this will help expand the markets and improve capitalism or whatever nonsense.
So I'm looking at his link in the previous sentence where he's talking about higher quality government and governments. It links to a article that he wrote called "The Libertarian Vice." And in it, he gives a couple of examples of things that places where governments have done a pretty good job. He says he names the Finnish government supports superb architecture. I don't care.
Yeah, what an argument.
Yeah. The Nazis had really nice outfits. What the hell?
The buildings are nice and don't fall down. I guess that's what we call high-quality government.
Buildings nice, don't fall down. A triumph of the modern state. The Swedes have made a good go at a welfare state. Sorta? I mean, they had to pull it... Aren't they the ones that had to pull it way back?
They had to pull it way back, and so did Denmark.
They've had almost no job growth in the private sector at all over the last ridiculous 20 or 30 years or something dumb like that.
When they were much more market based, and making money, and now they lose money. Yeah.
Yeah, their per capita income hasn't grown at all, or at least their ranking in per capita income has lagged way behind. The interstate highway system in the U.S. was a high return investment. Was it? I mean,
I don't know. I mean, they're closed all the time.
Well, no, they're not actually closed all the time. Parts of them.
I'm sorry, I live near Detroit.
No, that's true. That's true. No, but let me try to suss this out a little bit. You know how cities used to grow up around rivers because they were convenient places to have transportation happen and have hubs?
Yeah.
I mean, building up the interstate highway system probably caused a lot of towns to spring up under the same rationale, right? But is that actually a return on investment if people would have just made larger but more self-contained towns that were more separated by longer distances? I'm not sure.
By a road system that would be much easier to traverse because you know.
Well, maybe not.
Yeah, but I mean, it's a thought. I mean, it's like the towns were basically dictated by the layout of rivers, and then we had technology that would have allowed us to dictate where the towns were. And
the point I'm making is actually a little different from that. What I'm actually saying is that the federal interstate highway system made it possible for may have had a hand in making it possible for, is that qualified enough? In making it possible for the federal government to grip the U.S. with such an iron fist. Like, if the interstate system didn't exist, then cities and their surrounding suburban and rural areas would be more self-contained and less able to be dictated to by federal agents. You see what I'm saying?
I'm not sure if you're talking about.
Imagine in the absence of the. A lot of people are always talking about states' rights. Local government is better than state government is better than federal government because it's closer to you,
yeah.
Right? What if building the interstate highway system accelerated the federalization of the United States at the expense of local and state governments.
Well,
and if you combine that with the hypothetical statement that local governments are better than federal, that near governments are better than far away governments, then that actually made government worse in the long run, because it moved government from a local state paradigm to a more federal one more rapidly.
Oh, okay. No, I
see what I'm saying?
I see what you mean now. Whereas,
yeah.
See, I knew what the concept was that you were going for. Like, the towns, having their own, running themselves without interference from other towns. But like, it wasn't clicking in me that you meant like, oh, well, towns build right next to each other down freeways, so they're much more likely to be whole swaths of areas that are under the same regulations of the federal government, as opposed to like this place is 100 miles from this other place, and so it's kind of hard. It's harder to.
They have no desire to govern each other.
Yeah. They aren't trying to. Like suburbs of Detroit aren't subject to the terms that Detroit wants to dictate, because it has more influence over the federal arm that's going to,
Well, I'm kind of more thinking along the lines of like, Detroit is its own body with its own government that does most of the work, and then Lansing or Ann Arbor is another hub where it's another area where the government kind of is on its own and is not really influenced by Detroit. But now what we have is we have Detroit and Lansing and Ann Arbor are all basically controlled by the federal government in a much more thorough way than they would have in the absence of the interstate highway system.
Yeah, well, so essentially,
it's a pretty big counterfactual.
Essentially,
but
what
like,
you're saying,
I think there might be something there.
Essentially, what you're saying, what you're trying to point out, though, is that it's not really a provable point that we've gotten a return on investment on freeways.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Not even looking at it.
It's not just that. It's that it might have had costs that he's not thinking about.
Yeah, because we can't really establish what real benefits we do or do not have, other than there are roads that we can travel on, and
especially from a libertarian perspective.
Yeah, and since we have, and since it's one big network that basically covers everything, we don't really have any way to gauge if there's something else that could have been better, because everyone uses it.
Right. Exactly. So that's what that link is talking about. It's giving those examples. In the area of foreign policy, we've done a good job juggling the China-Taiwan relationship. Or how about the Aswan Dam in Egypt? It's like,
did we?
Oh, okay.
China and Taiwan have a great relationship now, don't they?
Well, no. But I guess the point he's making is that China hasn't engulfed Taiwan and conquered it, and he's saying he's saying without argument that that's just a good thing. And I mean, I guess I can see where he's coming from, but at the same time, I don't know, because he's not making a case.
Well, I mean, if he doesn't make a case, that just makes it weird, because then he's basically saying that America's military should be policing what other countries are doing between themselves, and we're just a superhero police force to protect and pretend to protect.
To protect Taiwan against China.
Yeah,
somehow.
I mean, I don't know what he's arguing for there. It's like, okay, so yeah, sure, it would be a bad thing if China went and slaughtered everyone in Taiwan and took the country back. I don't think that they would want to slaughter everyone. I think they would want to take it over, if anything. And
well, yeah, they want the money.
Yeah, but on the other hand, it's like, I don't necessarily know if the threat of that happening warrants us getting involved to the extent that, well, what if China just decides to do it anyway? Then do we have to go to war with China and make it a war between two giant countries?
Well, that's the idea, is that what he's saying is that by keeping China from conquering Taiwan without starting a war with us, we have done a good job in juggling that relationship. And I'm not sure that I'm convinced.
Well, you have to keep juggling, but I guess too.
That's another problem, right? Is that once you start juggling, you have to keep juggling, or the balls fall down. And only dealing with the China versus Taiwan is more like juggling chainsaws.
And then when you've got America on your side, Taiwan has no real reason to worry about it themselves either. So,
well, the thing is that Taiwan is that the U.S. isn't really on Taiwan's side per se, right? Like we don't, or do we? Like the question of whether they've been a recognized state has changed since the 70s and stuff. It's a really complicated question, and I'm not sure what point he's trying to make, because I'm not sure that I buy the association he's making. Maybe we should just move on.
Maybe. I mean, I'm not so sure that we did that good a job juggling between Hong Kong and China recently, but, whatever.
Well, that's even tougher, because Hong Kong is, like, literally part of sovereign China and didn't fight a war to get away from it.
I know, that's...
Right? Like,
it's, it was well, I'm just referencing the fact that they were waving American flags and everything, and it was just like, this is kind of messed up when you think about it. Like,
well, I mean, this is one of those things. America represents an ideal to them, and they don't live here. They don't know what it's like here. And to be fair, we're probably a little bit inured to the liberties that we have, and we don't know what it's like to be with them. I'm sure that if Hong Kong were a part of America, in the same way that it used to be part of the United Kingdom, that the people of Hong Kong would be much more prosperous, because the Chinese government is tyrannical and pretty
milks
horrible.
them for whatever they can.
It's not just that. Did you hear the story about the student who was in who was an exchange student or something in, like, I think Minnesota or maybe Wisconsin or something like that, somewhere in the north. And while they were here in the U.S., they made Winnie the Pooh jokes on the internet. And then they went back to China, and they are now arrested, and they're serving a 6-month term in prison.
Yeah, I heard a couple of those Winnie the Pooh stories.
Well, no, this just happened, that this person made these comments while in America, and then, a year later or more, they went back to China, and China's like, you're under arrest. Like, what? Yeah, you made Winnie the Pooh jokes while you were in America. It's like, but I was in America. Yeah, you're under arrest.
But
it's like,
you got to wonder how that can happen when they've got such great socialistic policies in China.
I mean, well, to be fair, I did read the recent book, Two Economists Drink Through the Socialist World, or something like that. Socialism Sucks is the main title, but it's basically two guys who are free market economists go to a bunch of socialist countries and gauge how bad their economies are by how bad the food and beer are, and hotels and stuff like
brilliant.
that. It's a great book. It's a wonderful book. But one of the points they make is that China is not a socialist nation, because there's a huge amount of private enterprise that's going on. It's just
there's
that
a huge market, there's huge growth, but it's stymied by this overly tyrannical, like, no free speech.
Yeah. There's no freedom of speech. There's very little freedom of expression other than speech. There's no political freedom whatsoever.
It's got a lot it's turning into a place that's a lot more like America, with its internal corruption it's more. Crony capitalism is more the word I was trying to.
Yeah, that would be a better.
Yeah, because especially it's worse in China, because there's a lot more. You gotta bribe officials and.
Well, China's always been like that. Like, if you ever read books about, like, ancient China,
if you watch
bribery
their own
and stuff
movies,
like that,
you see it.
Yeah, it's everywhere.
It's like, this is normal. What's wrong with you people? I don't.
Well, I mean, I'm not usually a cultural relativist, but I'm going to say that having a culture where you pay off the government officials every once in a while and they leave you alone is more honest.
Yeah. I was hoping that's where you were going with that, because I was going to attack it if you weren't.
Well, I mean, it might even be a little bit better if the overall costs are less.
I thought that you were going to say something like, where you bribe the government officials is just, it doesn't appeal to my libertarian instincts, but I was going to say, but technically doesn't it? Because,
it does, actually.
Even though it's something that, you shouldn't have to deal with if you're thinking in terms of freedom, nonetheless, you can pay for the service of them leaving you alone. Whereas I don't even know how many times I had to write back to the state of Michigan to deal with my $34 that I owed them in sales tax.
Yeah, pretty much.
Just cut the paperwork out. Let me pay the local magistrate and be done with it.
The bribe would probably less than the amount that I have to pay here.
I can go right to his office. I'll give him $50. Forget the 34. Here you go. He'll remember me. He'll be like, that guy's pretty good. He'll buy me a beer. And then I'll buy him a beer too to pay him back.
Yeah. But at least the number of officials is finite.
Yeah.
Unlike in America.
Yeah, the number you have to pay off here is not finite. Whereas the number that you would have to pay off in China, it's like they're basically people.
It's not even that. It's not even that. The people here in America, usually you can't pay them off because they're doing what they're doing to you because they think it's genuinely in your own best interest. In China, there's no illusion of that. It's just like, pay me a little bit and I'll stop bothering you. It's like, okay.
We took a long time on that one. What number are we on?
11.
Did we finish the second paragraph? It is interesting to contrast state capacity.
Oh, no, we're on 11, starting 11. That was just finished
11 proper. Okay, state capacity
Yeah.
libertarianism is not non-interventionist in foreign policy.
Womp womp.
As it believes in strong alliances with other
Womp womp.
strong quote-unquote alliances.
With other quote-unquote relatively free nations when feasible. What?
When we are not duty-bound to not allow them to be free nations.
Well, I mean, I just want to... hold on a minute first. Okay, hold on a second. I'm going to go to
your thing up. I'll keep
World War I.
That said, the usual libertarian problems of intervention because government makes a lot of mistakes should still apply to specific military actions. I don't know how you would go about that, but the alliances can be hugely beneficial, as illustrated by much of 20th century foreign policy and today much of Asia, which still relies on Pax Americana. Isn't everyone trying to get away from the petrodollar?
Some people are. Then they get bombed. Well, no. So the thing I was looking up is I was looking up the start of World War One, and World War One started, as most people know, when Gavrilo Princip assassinated the Austro-Hungarian Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo. So Princip was a Bosnian Serb Yugoslav nationalist, and Franz Ferdinand was obviously from Austria-Hungary. Austria-Hungary wasn't it a relatively free nation compared to like Yugoslavia or something like that at the time? I don't know.
Compared
it's an
to
open
Yugoslavia,
question,
probably. But I won't make any definite statements on that because
I don't know.
First off,
anything
doggone
about
it, if this
Eastern
guy
European
doesn't have to
history,
make
but-
any definite statements, I sure don't.
Well, it's funny because other relatively free nations, when feasible, but those kinds of strong alliances specifically result in things like World War I, World War II, domino theory. He's not. He doesn't appear to be thinking through the conclusions of what he's writing.
Well, it's so much easier just to say things and throw them down on paper and make it sound nice for people to gobble up. But the problem is, I don't know who he's writing it for because it's so much harder to fool libertarians than most other political.
I mean, I think he's writing it for libertarians. Like he's saying that if you're a libertarian, you should consider this state capacity libertarianism as a possible way to temper or maybe not temper, but maybe influence your philosophical leanings because it has these advantages over hardcore libertarianism, and I haven't figured out what those are yet.
Yeah, well, but it's so weird when people try to do that because he comes in and offers state capacity libertarianism to libertarians who are a group unlike two very famous political ideologies that we could name, has a deep and distinct philosophy with much tradition of reason and argument.
Yeah.
And then he presents the state capacity libertarianism idea with no real in-depth reason and logic or philosophy to it. It's like you're presenting that to exactly the wrong type of person.
Well, it's not just that. It's that, like, if he wanted to convince me that I need to start thinking about state capacity in the terms, he has to make a better case. He's not.
Well, he has to
making
make
one.
terms to start.
Well, if I assume that I could get the definition of state capacity from that paper, and that I'm, but even if I have a definition, his use of it appears to be non-standard anyway, because it can mean good or bad state capacity, and he's not differentiating.
And it could also mean
so,
fast growth of state capacity or slow growth of state capacity.
Well, state capacity can mean Nazism, or it can also mean building a dam, and it's like, okay, well, I think it's important to differentiate these two things. Why are we using the same word to describe them?
I don't know, newspeak? Is this like his attempt at newspeak for libertarians?
It kind of sounds like it.
It is interesting to contrast state capacity libertarianism to libertarianism, another offshoot of libertarianism, on most substantive issues. The libertarians might be very close to state capacity libertarians. I'm somewhat tempted to agree with that, but I'm still not sure what state capacity libertarians would be. But
I think it's just his name for what libertarians are.
I mean,
or maybe no. Well, but emphasis and focus really matter, and I would offer this partial list of differences.
Oh boy, he's gonna give us some
differences.
actual definitions of what he's talking about, even though. Yeah.
Yes.
So, A, the libertarian starts by assuring the left that they favor lots of government transfer programs. The state capacity libertarian recognizes that demands of mercy are never-ending, that economic growth can benefit people more than transfers, and within the government sphere, it is willing to emphasize an analytical, cold-hearted comparison between government discretionary spending and transfer spending. Okay, well, just looking at that would get nothing done. But anyway, discretionary spending might well win out at many margins.
Well, I mean, no. I mean, in Part A, state capacity libertarianism is basically saying, let's be libertarians, and let's assume that markets will allow economic growth. That this is his position for state capacity libertarianism in A is pretty close to, I'd say, a standard libertarian position.
It's okay. Here's the problem I have with it. With his final sentence saying discretionary spending might well win out at many margins. First off, there's the whole price structure in a socialistic system problem there, where it's like, well, how do we know that it did or didn't? And second off, what really happens at these government junctures? Because he's only talking about the ideology behind it, but when you actually put it in place in a government that's functioning in this state capacity way, you have the problem of all these government officials are just sitting there and they're like, well, we have to make a decision, and it's time to look at, do we take the discretionary spending margin or the market margin, and then they just decide on the one that most benefits government.
Wait, this doesn't make any sense.
Where you at?
A comparison between government discretionary spending and transfer spending. But I looked up the definition because I was confused. In American public finance, discretionary spending is government spending implemented through an appropriations bill. It is an optional part of fiscal policy, in contrast to entitlement programs for which funding is mandatory and determined by the number of eligible recipients. Some areas funded by discretionary spending are national defense, foreign aid, education, and transportation. So he's saying,
that's what I meant when I said it won't get anything done, because we're still caught in that whole discretionary versus non-discretionary spending problem.
Yeah. But I guess what he's saying here is that if you have to spend a government dollar, it may be in most places better to spend it on education or national defense as opposed to entitlement programs. But that's not the seed of the problem with transfer spending. Like the laws that make up what we spend on transfer spending could also be changed, right? Like libertarians object to transfer spending in general because we think it's immoral. Or something like that, right?
Yes.
So, but discretionary spending isn't any better necessarily, because just calling it discretionary spending isn't saying where it's going. Like, okay, if it went to education, maybe I could see why you would support education spending as opposed to just a flat-out transfer.
Yeah, no. This
But if it were going to foreign aid instead, that's also discretionary spending. I would say that's probably not what we want to do. And then putting money in education if what putting money into education effectively does is transfer wealth from net taxpayers to people with lots of children in cities, then that's still a transfer spending. It's just that it's a discretionary transfer spending that's not dependent on the welfare rolls specifically.
I don't think that it really needs to be as confusing as you thought it was, because really what is he saying here? He's not solving any actual problem. What he's doing is saying, let's take this jumble of spending that we already do, and now let's just change the values of each individual thing that we're spending, and somehow the market is going to tell us which ones will be better, but they're not taking place in a market.
Okay, that's
none of this
worse.
takes place in a market, and he's just talking about raising and lowering how much is being spent on each one within that particular sphere of spending. So nothing has changed.
Uh-huh.
The market has no real input on this. This can have horrendous input on the market.
Yeah.
And if it has a good input on the market, we have no way to gauge that. So this solves nothing.
Well, I'm.
This would just be Republicans
it's
and
pretty...
Democrats in Congress arguing over where we should be spending the money, like normal. So nothing changes.
Yeah, I don't. Great. B, the polarizing left is explicitly opposed to a lot of capitalism and de facto standing in opposition to state capacity due to the polarization, which tends to thwart problem solving. The polarizing left is thus a bigger villain for state capacity libertarianism than it is for libertarianism. For the libertarians, temporary alliances with the polarizing left are possible because both oppose Trump and other bad elements of the right wing. It is easy, maybe too easy, to market libertarianism to the left as a critique and revision of libertarians and conservatives.
Well, okay, so this doesn't actually help point out any difference.
He's just saying this is a difference. He's just saying this is a difference between he's trying to make the difference between libertarians and state capacity libertarians, because so far this should have been at the start of.
But it's funny because he's basically saying, yeah, there's a lot of things that they both agree on, but libertarians would let's see which
would stand with Antifa.
They would stand with Antifa, and the
state capacity libertarians would probably not.
So it's basically just Republicans and Democrats arguing in Congress. Are we still there? Sort of.
It sounds like it. Except I think that he would deny that there are any state capacity libertarians in the Republican Party.
Well, I'm just saying that there's the two large groups of people that are going to wield all the power, and these are already the things they argue over. So he's not introducing new ideas.
Well, no, he's not trying to introduce new ideas. He's trying to differentiate, because.
Well, I know. I just said these points are pointing out the differences between the libertarian and the what was it? State capacity libertarian.
The state capacity libertarian, yeah.
It doesn't sound like any of these differences matter as opposed to what's happening right now in reality.
Well, I'd agree with that, yeah.
I mean, first off, neither of these parties, neither of these ideas have influence anywhere.
Yeah.
You could argue that the libertarian ones do, because they're so far left sometimes that they may as well just...
Well, they just glom on to the far left and agree with them, so yeah, whatever.
It's like that cartoon dog from Looney Tunes that was always following Butch around and talking about how cool Butch was.
Oh, I remember that, yeah.
Part C. Libertarian Will Wilkinson made the mistake of expressing enthusiasm for Elizabeth Warren. It is hard to imagine a state capacity libertarian making this same mistake, since so much of Warren's energy is directed toward tearing down American business. Ban fracking? Really? Send money to Russia, Saudi Arabia, lose American jobs, and make climate change worse all at the same time? Nope. Okay, so the difference between a libertarian and a state capacity libertarian is that one of them does like Elizabeth Warren and the other one might not.
Probably doesn't, because she's too anti-business. But But then what's he offering as an alternative?
I mean, I'm still looking at this and saying you could be saying this about Democrats and Republicans. This is just describing Democrats
pretty
and
much.
Republicans.
Part D. State capacity libertarianism is more likely to make a mistake of, say, endorsing high-speed rail from Los Angeles to San Francisco, if indeed that is a mistake, and decrying the ability of the U.S. government to get such a thing done. Which mistakes they are most likely to commit is an underrated way of assessing political philosophies.
Am I parsing that right?
I think he's just saying, yeah, this article is written. Okay, I think I understand this
because
article.
of that last sentence.
I think so. Yeah. Well, the last two sentences, Part D. I think this is an article by Tyler Cowen to principled libertarians saying, please don't hate me. I don't hate markets.
I disagree slightly. I think this article is more him trying to become a libertarian without everyone calling him a libertarian, but it's not working very well.
Well, he's saying I have these four. This is a partial list of differences, but this is four big differences between me and what I would consider to be a libertarian.
And all he really said is, I still.
Isn't he just parsing things way too finely? I mean, considering how close the libertarian and the state capacity libertarian are going to be, if there was a large body of people in either of these camps, wouldn't there be a considerable overlap in their Venn diagrams on the like a Nolan chart kind of thing?
Almost certainly. I mean, there's a lot to
he seems to be saying, I'm not one of those libertarians. Please don't hate me. I still like markets.
What does Peter Thiel have to do with this? That last sentence, it says, you will note the influence of Peter Thiel on state capacity libertarianism. Now, first off, is state capacity...
Though I have never heard him frame the issues in this way.
Note the influence that this guy that didn't frame these things in this way had on this thing that... Does state capacity libertarianism actually exist?
Well, that's why he said it's like a non-sticky name. He's like fumbling for a word for what he is. He's
then how
trying
can
to find
Peter
a name
Thiel have
for
influence
himself.
on it?
Well, I think that it's because Peter Thiel has made... I think it's Peter Thiel, actually. But I think the point is that Peter Thiel has made statements comparable to what he's saying here, is what he's saying?
Is he saying that Peter Thiel had influence on him?
I think he's saying that Peter Thiel had influence on the expression on the ideas he's expressing, although he's never used the phrase state capacity libertarianism. That he's basically saying, I agree with Peter Thiel on a lot of things, and so think of what you've heard Peter Thiel say, and think of me saying that.
All right.
That helps. Not at all.
Furthermore, which ideas survive well in internet debate has been an important filter on the evolution of the doctrine. That point is under-discussed for all sorts of issues, and it may get a blog post of its own. Well, I don't know if... Like, saying that ideas that don't survive an internet debate don't tend to get any traction is not... It's kind of misleading, because the traction has already been had for a lot of the ideas, and that's why people are on the internet debating about them. I mean, I don't really have a point beyond that for that sentence. It seems like there's... I don't know how that relates to the rest of his article.
I think he's just trying to make a differentiation between internet debate and real debate.
But it still has... Did he try debating people about this on the internet and lose the debate because he doesn't have a fleshed-out philosophy, and so...
So he has a comment section, so I assume that he's like... The mean things that people say to me on my comment section are, quote, internet debate, end of quote.
Oh, yeah, so he's one of those people that's like, well, it was internet debate, so it doesn't really mean anything, and...
No, it's
which
just
is the
people
go-to
saying
for
things on
people
the
that have
internet.
nothing when they argue on the internet.
Well, so this is why we went through this article, is because I think that now that we've gone through this article, we can just kind of blow through the other three articles and just basically talk about, like, even we could just go back to Jeff Deist's article, because he just has, like, 10 points on why this is stupid, and I think we can just chuckle
Yeah,
at them.
let's do that, because I'm sure that Jeff Deist is more knowledgeable on this stuff than me, so he'll have made much better points. But
oh yeah,
which one was his? The state is a predator?
No. Thoughts on Tyler
Tyler
Cowen's
Cowen.
state capacity libertarianism.
Okay, so
First paragraph is just an intro. My initial responses, by my I mean Jeff Deist's initial responses, in no particular order, are as follows. 1. There is no political will or constituency for skillful technocratic state management of society. This is a pipe dream, once simply referred to as elusive good government. When do public choicers of all people give this up?
Number 2, there is no third way between state and market, regardless of technology or material development. Futurism is bunk. The question before us today is the same as 30, 50, or 100 years ago. Who decides? Decentralization versus centralization is the most important policy question.
3. Western states won't give up their sclerotic regulatory tax, central banking, and entitlement systems no matter how many flying cars or hyperloops we want. This reality will be a huge drag on science, infrastructure, medicine, health, and overall well-being.
4. The environmental movement will quash nuclear, especially after Fukushima, and the energy capacity versus weight cost issue will continue to plague electric cars and planes. He just shot that one in the foot.
In the foot only?
Well, now it can't gain traction.
That's true. Left socialism, not libertarian futurism, is the rising tide across the West, and its constituency skews young. Adopting its pose, language, or ostensible goals won't produce Singapore.
6. Climate change is not a problem or issue for anyone to solve. Period.
This is why I love Jeff Deist.
He's a good man.
He is a good man. 7. The West can't advance until it stops warring. War and peace won't be solved technocratically, and true non-interventionism requires a painful rethinking of the hubris known as universalism. I thought technocrats believed in realpolitik. Okay, so this is interesting. I just want to make a point about that second sentence. War and peace won't be solved technocratically. Technocratically, it might even get worse, because now we have, drones fighting other drones. And all it is basically this giant hole that we throw money into.
Money and materials and just...
money and materials and, yeah.
Blow up as much steel as possible.
Yeah.
It's like, what'll I have for breakfast today? And then you open your refrigerator and just set fire to everything.
Or you open up your refrigerator and there's a quadcopter hovering inside and it shoots you with missiles.
Might be preferable to burning all my food. I can't stand...
Well, you might survive burning all your food.
I can't stand seeing good food go to waste. Just shoot me.
I can understand that.
Where did we leave off?
8.
Number 8. Human happiness and prosperity depends on elements of civil society which libertarian futurists don't like. Faith, family, et al. Hence the cheap jab at Ron Paulism.
9. We build capacity in society through profit saving and capital investment. Government makes this worse, not better, in each and every case.
Number 10. Libertarianism simply means private. It is a non-state approach to organizing human society. It is not narrow or confining. In fact, everything Cowen desires in an improved society can be advanced through private mechanisms.
Beautiful.
Yeah, he did sum that up pretty well. I like the Ron Paul one where he... a cheap jab at Ron Paulism. Human happiness and prosperity depend on elements of civil society which libertarian futurists don't like.
That was a
explain it to me, because I might just not be familiar with libertarian futurism. Is it just people thinking that robots will make everything so good that we won't have to worry about much of everything at all, kind of like the Zeitgeist people? Is it like a non-scarcity thing?
Well, I mean, I guess he's kind of by proxy calling Tyler Cowen a libertarian futurist here. I think it's one of those things where, you know how in Plato's Republic he's like, oh yeah, we got to get rid of families because families can have thoughts and organization that undermines the state. I think it's like that.
There's
only couched in nicer phraseology.
I didn't know there was a libertarian version of that exact same thing.
Well, I mean, it's a little different.
We're only
right?
talking
Because
about getting rid of decentralized centers of self-governance. In a free society, in a free market society. That's what we're talking about. Totally different.
Well, I mean, I think there's an element there of the rabid internet atheist thing, where it's like, oh, faith and family don't matter. It's all about yada yada yada, and a lot of people who claim to be libertarians who would probably glom onto Tyler Cowen's blob of nonsense are probably kind of in that field as well,
But I take issue with anyone that would want to call themselves a libertarian and have the idea that we should break up families. It's like, if you want to be in the libertarian ideology of things, you would more likely tend to say, well, nobody should have to if they don't want to, which is kind of weird because
well, that's the thing, is that they let their personal preferences sneak into their like policy recommendations.
Yeah, which is why you can't fool libertarians, because you can always see the snake.
Yeah.
I mean, when you see someone talking in those terms, it's like, yep, that's the guy that would make this particular kind of regulation that would be horrible for everyone. It's like, I'm a libertarian and I believe in free markets and all these principles, and so get me in office and I'll work towards a better libertarian future. And then like people vote for him and he's like, all right, no more families ever. It's like taking everything to an extreme to where it's like, it's kind of like the libertarians that are like, well yeah, but like children are also, they also have rights, and so they should be able to run off at 3 years old because they have they have the right to be as free as anyone else, and so parents shouldn't be able to keep them. And it's like, okay, well, I mean, that they'll die, but or be raped, or
many of them will die,
quite possibly by rape. It's like, sure, they can have those rights, but like, let's make sure they're fed and can exercise them first and won't be raped. Let's start there.
We'll start with the big three.
Yeah, I think it's reasonable to
food, shelter,
I think it's
no
reasonable
rape.
to say that you don't have to protect an adult from a world of possible violence and rape if they understand it, but it might be necessary to protect a child, and so who's better suited to do that than the people that brought them into existence? And if they're not,
the world. Yeah.
And we can demonstrate that they're not for certain reasons, like maybe they're beating them or something, they're something specific.
Yeah.
But it's just like, there's always going to be wiggle room in any kind of philosophical system and any kind of regulatory system where it's like, well, did they beat the kid, or did they turn their back for a second and there was a staircase there and nobody knew there was a staircase there and a kid fell down the staircase, but other than that they're perfectly good parents. And so it's, there's always going to be that constant drawing of the line of, no, take this person's kids away, but don't take this person's kids away. I don't think that there's any way to really solve that 100%. But I certainly think that it would be solved a lot better in a more libertarian society, because, I mean, kids get taken away for stupid reasons right now, and there's nothing anyone can do about it.
Yeah.
We came to your house and you had like some fast food wrappers on the floor, and that could be a fire hazard, and so we're taking your kids. They are now wards of the state until they turn 18 and get addicted to heroin.
They have to wait to be 18 to
They're
be addicted
supposed
to heroin?
to. They don't all. They're only supposed to after they've been shoved out onto the streets by the government to fend for themselves.
Yeah.
After not having been taught how to fend for themselves.
But they could just stay here. No, you have wrappers on the floor.
And you didn't bring your kid to school one day.
Yeah, we went to a museum. Yes.
Clearly you were raising a terrorist.
Illegal. So
there's that.
So there's just a couple of points. There's those other two articles. So Joe Salerno's article is definitely worth reading. We won't go through the whole thing, but he basically goes through and makes many of the similar points that we made about this being muddle-headed. But one thing that he does do, and you'll love this, is that he appears to actually have a definition of what Cowen is calling his ideal state. And according to Joe Salerno, the ideal state for Cowen is that it is a non-marginal actor whose task is to achieve certain collective outcomes intuited by Cowen or some other political philosopher. So that's Joe Salerno's best guess at what Cowen wants to happen.
I mean, if I were just to hear that description of it, I would only be able to think of Tyler Cowen as a Marxist that isn't going to admit he hates markets.
Yeah, something like that. Well, so one of the other things that Salerno goes through is a couple of response articles by David Henderson, I think, and Richard Ebeling, and talks about how David Henderson kind of doesn't do a very good job of countering Cowen that well, and Ebeling does a better job in certain places, but both of their analysis or rebuttals have a lot of holes in them, at least according to Salerno. And the article ends with Joe saying, in contrast, hardcore, muscular libertarianism begins with the insight that the state is fundamentally different in nature from society and economy, and stands wholly apart from them. The main premise of state predation libertarianism, as we may call it, I love that name, was expressed quite trenchantly by the men and women of the American old right, such as H.L. Mencken, Albert J. Nock, Frank Chodorov, Isabel Patterson, and Rose Wilder Lane, whose most eminent intellectual descendant was Murray Rothbard. From them came no talk of growing the state to adequate capacity, or directing it on a path to social efficiency. For them, the hallmarks of the state were its predatory nature and its existence apart from society. Let us conclude with two passages from old right authors along these lines. And then he quotes Albert J. Nock and Frank Chodorov at length, talking about how the state is a criminal organization. It is fundamentally criminal. You can't make it not criminal and have it still be a state. The state is proud of its own position apart and above society, etc., etc. It's just, a great article. And then, well,
that's really what I mean when I tell people that you can't fool a real libertarian with nonsense like this, because there is a rich history of writing and philosophy behind it. The Republican and Democrat ideologies do not, the left and right do not really have as deep-rooted a philosophy, and so when one of them claims to be libertarian, you can smell it a mile away, and when someone tries to tell you something is libertarian that is not, you can smell it a mile away. There's no fooling people that,
Yeah, there's no way to... So the first thing I do is I point a gun at this guy's head. Let me stop you there. And then the final article was The Pretense of Intuition by Peter Klein. And there's a couple of interesting points here where he notes that Cowen provides a laundry list of societal challenges he claims only a highly capable state can solve, without discussing any in detail. Of course, each issue has been analyzed many times in libertarian literature using the standard concepts, theories, and frameworks such as marginal analysis, demonstrated preference, opportunity costs, Austrian price theory, comparative institutional analysis, and so on, and no evidence for market failure has surfaced. But Cowen's intuition tells him markets aren't good enough in one area or another. And he brings up this point in the next paragraph. This is actually Cowen's long-held view. You may remember his 2014 article title, "The Lack of Major Wars May Be Hurting Economic Growth," which echoed the Mariana Mazzucato position that government spending is the main source of technological progress. I remember a friendly argument with Cowen, this is Klein speaking, some 20 years ago about NASA, which he insisted was an example of benevolent government intervention. And I brought up the standard counter-arguments. Theoretical. How do you measure benefits and costs? How do you measure opportunity costs? Empirical. There's lots of case study evidence suggesting that widespread waste, fraud, and long-term negative effects on the direction of science and technology. And deontological. Is it okay to coerce people to support transfer payments that they see as against their self-interest? He didn't buy it. Space exploration is just so cool that the usual arguments don't apply.
No, that's usually what I hear when anyone talks about NASA. It's just, ooh, it's NASA. It's doing good things.
Yeah.
It's like, no, and then they try to appeal to like, well, look at all the great things NASA invented, like Velcro, and it's like, well, no, they used Velcro. Someone else invented.
I don't know
even
what
if NASA did invent it, they couldn't invent it without multiple market actors inventing things first, and NASA taking those things and saying, "I will string these together by the power of taxpayer dollars and make them into a functioning rocket to go send up into space and never use again."
And explode. I just kind of think about it like someone who says this to you, and you're like, "Hello, my name is Opportunity Costs. Nice to meet you." and then you just like smack them in the face, and they're like, "Why did you do that?" And you're like, "You would have been hit by a meteorite if I hadn't."
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of that in NASA. Okay, so here I'm doing something horrible right now. I'm typing in news.google.com. I'm just going to type in NASA.
Oh no! Don't do it.
It's a trick. It's always a trick. So I typed in NASA.
Yeah.
Let's see. So NASA's doing a lot of important things, so the news should reflect that. Sci-fi author Andy Weir says NASA didn't name Artemis moon program after his book. NASA's...
No, Artemis is... Oh my god.
Yeah, exactly. Oh my god. NASA's Spitzer Space Telescope ends mission of astronomical discovery. All right, so there's the end of a mission. February sky. NASA's top tips for sky watchers. Earth science mission named after former NASA official. All right. This is just so cool. Maxar and NASA will demonstrate orbital spacecraft assembly with a new robotic arm. They'll demonstrate it or they'll do it? It says demonstrate.
Demonstrate means do. I mean, yeah, it's
okay,
fine.
Yeah, that one's fine. Okay, so there's some science-y stuff going on there. NASA honors astronauts lost in 3 space tragedies.
No, hold on, stop. So the next one on my screen. So you remember how Tyler Cowen was talking about how, like, we need to increase state capacity so that the state can do good things faster? Yeah. Proposed House bill would delay NASA's return to the moon. But done.
Is that better or worse than NASA honors astronauts lost in 3 space tragedies with Day of Remembrance?
Oh, that's just. This is way worse. The proposed House bill is way worse than NASA saying these 3 people died. Let's give them a moment of silence. I'm totally fine with that.
Yeah,
that's entirely voluntary and has no negative effects on anything. But the fact that Tyler Cowen is talking about growing. Yeah, well, so the fact that Tyler Cowen is talking about using state capacity to speed up the progress of science, and then we've got a proposed House bill delays NASA's return to the moon is just like, oh, that's perfect. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, I think we're done. I think we did it.
I mean, there's a finite amount of resources, and you can't use them all at the same time twice.
Pretty much.
NASA to allow researchers to fly on commercial suborbital vehicles. Proposed House bill would delay. Okay, yeah, you found that one.
Yeah, I mean, we don't need to go through this.
Yeah,
this much more
the point is made.
Like,
I see a lot of articles where it's like NASA is talking about how the Earth may end because of an asteroid, and the worst part is half the time, if you actually read the article, no one's even quoting.
They're saying that it's not going to happen.
It's either that or the person's not actually quoting anyone from NASA. They're like guessing that NASA might say this somewhere.
Yeah, right. Or they're taking a line out of an article that was written 5 years ago and expanding on it to mean something, in reference to something that's happening today that they never actually said.
And I mean, what have we got? We've gotten some things out of space exploration, right? Like space exploration. Like I think all the things that we got out of space exploration had nothing to do with...
This is one of those things. We have no way to determine what we would have had if we hadn't spent that money there.
Yeah, but I mean, even...
Like that's how opportunity costs work. We don't know.
But even granting that, it's just like, let's try to think if... Like, maybe from a research standpoint, we can say that we got measurements and images, right? I mean, but...
No, not really. I mean, there have always been people that said, "Oh, if we had microgravity, we could do this." But as far as I know, there hasn't ever been anything that was like, without microgravity, we couldn't have done this.
What does that have to do with the measurements I'm talking about?
Well, I mean, what that's my point. Is that
I'm not talking about like I'm not talking about like gravity vibrations or anything like that. I'm talking about like distances between stars and images that.
Why? But what do we gain by knowing any of that?
I bring it up only to say a lot of this is stuff that we don't. I mean, how much of this do we really need a telescope in outer space to use? It's.
Well, I mean, probably.
It's like if we got some measurements between galaxies and things, even though we can't do anything functional with them, maybe.
Well, you can do a lot with them. I mean, but my point is more along the lines of, let's say that you had a choice between knowing the exact distance between Betelgeuse and Antares 4 and like a flying car. Like we have no idea what we gave up.
I'm trying to make the opportunity cost demonstration here with
yeah.
You've got you put these expensive satellites out into space and they measure distances, and then scientists that work at NASA say we need more funding, so give us money and we'll build a telescope that can measure more precisely. And so they get a ton of money and they build a better telescope, send it up out into space. And this happens like 5 times to the tunes of billions, possibly trillions of dollars. And then it's like, well, what I got my TV from Insignia from Best Buy, and I'm sitting here reading on the internet about NASA doing nothing basically. So I've already gotten more worth out of this television connected to the internet than I'm getting out of NASA. But NASA had such great influence on building the things that allow you to use the internet. Yeah, nobody ever would have thought to connect 2 computers together if it hadn't been for DARPA. Yeah.
It would never have happened.
Nobody would have been sitting there one day ever in the history of mankind and said, I can talk to someone through electricity with a phone. I wonder if I could apply that to a machine like a phone that also sends electrical signals to communicate to other machines.
That is crazy talk.
It's like the road thing. Like this is how people actually think. I have heard so many times people say that we wouldn't have had the internet if it wasn't for DARPA, and it's just like it's the same thing as the libertarian road thing that Tom Woods always says, where it's like you've got a business here and a guy's house here, and the guy at the business is standing there and the guy at the house is standing there, and they're both just looking around trying to figure out, well, what do we do now?
What the hell am I supposed to do now?
I need to go buy widgets. I can't go buy widgets. There's not a thing in existence. And then you take 5 people standing around this guy's house and sit them at a table where they can all look at each other and talk, and magically they come up with roads after taking $5 from everyone. It's like it just doesn't make any sense. The arguments I hear for government always end up being these absolute denials of all human imagination.
Well, there can be no imagination except in the framework of a coercive, tyrannical system. You should know
obviously.
That. If it weren't for tyranny, there would be no imagination.
Why do you think the Nazis stole so much art?
Investment?
Possibly. It might have just been investment.